The following message is brought to you by the Ezra Institute for Contemporary Christianity. To learn more about the Ezra Institute's mission to advance the Lordship of Christ, please visit www.ezrainstitute.ca.
Most irresponsible, disgusting pig alive in the world.
Shut up for a second, please.
We're in a cultural war.
How do you think you are talking to me like that?
I resent the fact that your implication that only you are a Canadian.
The culture war is back.
All right, my friends, the culture war is on. Couldn't have a better day for it. Lots of bright sunshine and sunshiny faces here in the studio as well. Today's warriors, the Dr. Scott Masson, Associate Pastor at the Westminster Chapel in Toronto. Back with us, Scott. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, John.
Likewise, Cheri DiNovo with the NDP in the legislature, the MPP for Parkdale High Park. How's Cheri doing?
I'm doing very, very well. Also a doctor, by the way, theology.
Well,
United Church. So we're doctors dueling.
It'll be a meeting of the minds, so to speak, but I'm not sure you'll be on the same page. Now, let's start with this one. This is a highly controversial and polarizing figure, to say the least. Dr. Henry Morgentaler passed last week at the age of 90, and certainly his legacy is fraught with all kinds of different interpretations. I guess in simplistic terms, I would ask, heroic or diabolical, if those two extremes are somehow there on the spectrum at all. What would you say, Scott Masson?
I would say diabolical, as you would have thought, John. The consequence of this, the banning or the breaking of the law against abortion in Canada has been over 3 million deaths of children. Morgentaler himself personally administered 80,000 clinical deaths of the unborn. There's a child that dies 12 every hour in Canada as a consequence of this. Furthermore, I would say that abortion has by and large liberated men from the fear of fatherhood, but not pregnancy. So if a woman gets pregnant, what the abortion does is it serves to reduce the responsibility of men to take care of their families. The consequence of this is, as we've seen, a rampant breakdown of the family, such that women are left to fend for themselves. And the social cohesion has been massive since this, and it's a direct consequence of men being freed from the shackles of fatherhood. So abortion has actually done more to damage women as well as killing untold millions of children. Now, I would say it's a genocide, quite frankly. So,
all right, but that's an interesting aspect to bring into the equation as well. Over to Cheri DiNovo now. Obviously, Scott says diabolical. Would you oppose him in saying Morgentaler was heroic for emancipating women or reproductive rights?
Absolutely. And what I just heard is complete and utter balderdash, in fact, offensive balderdash. Morgentaler himself survived a Holocaust. He was an inmate at Auschwitz and came out of that in his early 20s, weighing 70 pounds. What he did for women in this country is nothing less than heroic. He saved women's lives. And to quote Bertha Wilson, who was Chief Justice when this diabolical law was overturned, she said, "The right of a woman to choose to reproduce or not to reproduce is an integral part of a woman's humanity and dignity. To force a woman to be pregnant is a cruel and unusual punishment." And it was ruled so under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We know before the law was overturned that hundreds of women died every year. In fact, when Brian Mulroney attempted to reintroduce the law in the early 90s, within a week, a young woman bled to death from a self-induced abortion. And I know the vast majority of Canadians agree with me. In fact, only 6% of Canadians think the way Scott does. The vast majority think that where we're at is where we should be at, that women should have a right to choose, and to choose to have a happy, healthy pregnancy, and to have every child a wanted child.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what you're saying is that the countless millions that are murdered in the womb...
They're not murdered. We're talking about embryos, and I can tell you point blank that there is no scientific consensus, not even close, on when human life begins.
Really?
And in fact, if you would rule an embryo or a fetus in its early stages as a child, then you're really subjugating an adult woman's rights to an embryos, which I think most Canadians find patently ridiculous.
Well, let's stick with the science here.
And also,
let's stick with the science here, Cheri.
What you are actually proposing imposing is cruel. I stood outside of Morgentaler's clinics escorting young girls, many of whom had been raped, to have the only abortion open to them.
Something like 3% of the cases that will be the case. Let's stick with the science here, Cheri. The development of a human being begins at conception and it continues after birth.
Absolutely not. Two-thirds of all human embryos are aborted spontaneously. So, if you want to argue that theologically, you would say that the Creator is the greatest abortionist of all. Two-thirds of all embryos.
There's a difference between death and murder, Cheri. This is a logical difference, which apparently you can't understand.
There's absolutely nothing in the Bible about abortion. I used to have my confirmation children try to find such a reference, and they never could.
Of course there is. There's two men contending over a woman who caused the death of the child, whether willfully or unwillingly. If the child dies, there will be an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Of course it is.
All right, if I may just interject, because I know this debate is never going to be settled. It's been going on and from time immemorial, so we're sort of rehashing that. But Scott, when you said something interesting, that added dimension culturally, and this is after all the culture war, that somehow this absolves men of certain responsibilities, and that has a ripple effect or lasting implications, ramifications throughout the broader culture. Cheri DiNovo, how do you comment to that?
Well, it's just patently absurd. I mean, this does not affect family life. All these horror stories of what might happen, should abortion be legal, and what might happen if same-sex marriage became legal, have all proved to be false. The actual reality is family life, as it always is just as functional or dysfunctional, as the case may be, independent of either of those changes in the legal system. And the bottom line is,
guess
do we want
children
to be loved and wanted or not? Do we actually want to force women to be pregnant? This is patently
that's not the point. The point is
ungodly, I would say. We want children to be loved. There are enough unloved, unwanted children in the world.
We understand that. That's the
we
ideal.
Understand that point. The point here is that men these days can choose only sex but not fatherhood. Mothers alone determine whether children can be allowed to exist. Would you let me finish, please? I've let you speak.
Okay, hang on, Cheri. Let him.
Legalized abortion was supposed to grant enormous freedom to women. It has had the perverse result of freeing men and trapping women. And this has been commonly observed. It's produced the social catastrophe, which is evident in patterns of female poverty and the abandonment of both women and children by irresponsible males. That it has weakened the moral protections and obligations that bound men to women and children, and it's effectively allowed men to demand abortion as a means of escaping their responsibility to marry and to take responsibility for the children.
That, as much?
Because now it's a woman's right to choose, so it's all on her.
Well, would you also say the pill did that back in the 60s and the 50s?
No, I would not, because there's still an element of volition there, and you're not going to hold a woman responsible for, because the pill is not foolproof. You can still conceive a child even on the pill, whereas here the woman is actually choosing. So if she chooses to have the child, it's on her. It's her responsibility. So there's pressure on the woman, and surgeons will themselves pressure women to have abortion, particularly if the child is going to be handicapped. So men now pressure women precisely because it's all on the woman, and they're absolved of the responsibility, and we can see this societally. So we see the social breakdown of the family as a direct consequence of the abortion law.
Absolute balderdash and nonsense. In fact, the logical extension of your argument would be to say that, just like I said, every child should be a wanted child, every marriage should be a marriage entered into freely and full of and with love, not because people have to get married. I mean, that concept has produced the more dysfunctional families than the idea that marriage is chosen freely, not because you have to be there.
More dysfunctional families than we have today, Cheri?
Quite frankly, dysfunctional families have always been there. And abortion,
Pure
by
assertion.
the way, has always been there. It's just that the law, thanks to Henry Morgentaler and to huge numbers of women and other activists, men as well, who fought to change the law for women's sakes, that law has freed women and it's freed families to be about love and about wanted children, and not because they have to be there. That's what we should be about.
Would you is there anything to Scott's point, say in the broader scope, social mores having shifted in the last generation or two has led to a breakdown in family units, societal consequences, or was it ever thus as
It was ever thus. In fact, it was far
Nonsense.
worse when women were not
Nonsense.
considered equal.
Pure
and
assertion
women
and
couldn't
balderdash
work.
and nonsense, to use your word.
You would argue that the emancipation of women, that women's right to vote, has led to the breakdown in the family.
I most certainly would not do that.
Well,
I'm talking
absolutely,
about. Let's stick to the case and not get off topic.
If you're looking at the 50s and 60s, you're looking at a period when women did not have equal rights with men in terms of
off
employment.
Topic. Let's stick to the topic.
Well, but where is this halcyon error that you're pointing to?
I'm not talking about a halcyon area. We're talking about the right to abort on demand, which places the entire responsibility for the child on the woman. So for the first time in history,
it's called
the father
freedom
and the
to
doctor
choose.
and the health insurance actuary can point a finger at the woman as the person who allowed an inconvenient human being to come into the world. Your choice of words, an inconvenient human being, an unwanted child.
I actually didn't say inconvenient.
You said an
at
unwanted
any point.
child.
An unwanted child.
Right.
All right, well, why don't I put it to the
force
folks?
a woman to be pregnant.
Let me put it to the
evil.
folks quickly now. In the passing of Henry Morgentaler late last week, I wasn't here, so our first crack at this with Dr. Scott Masson from the Westminster Chapel in Toronto and Dr. Cheri DiNovo with the NDP in the legislature. How do you see Morgentaler through the prism of the 90 years that he lived, but more recently the legacy as a provider of abortions and defying the law until it was changed? Heroic or diabolical? We'll take some fast calls.
The culture war is back.
All right, we get back into the culture war with the Warriors, Dr. Scott Masson and Cheri DiNovo, and the issue is, of course, the Morgentaler legacy, having passed at 90 late last week. Wondering if, in fact, he was heroic or diabolical, how you assessed that he was given the Order of Canada, but in response, there were some people who actually turned theirs back in because they felt that was inappropriate. So you can see a polarizing figure, to be sure. Just wanted to suss out how you feel in hindsight. Jason, let's take your call. Good morning, Oakley Show.
Good morning, John. Great day for talk radio.
Thank you, my friend.
To be honest, I had to reach for the phone. This sanctimonious clown that you just had on.
Well, no ad hominems. Let's just talk to the issue.
Okay, he was a hero. Morgentaler was a hero, an absolute hero, because it's 2013. And in this man's lifetime, he got us to a stage in 2013 where women have a right to choose. It's not murder. It's murder to sentence unwanted children to lives in families where it's not. It drives me nuts. I can't believe that this guy would go on and on. And
well, all right,
on.
the guy is Dr. Scott Masson, but where he also made the case that this leads to the dissolution of, say, societal bonds and things like that. I mean, how do you feel about that notion?
I just don't agree. I believe, I have a personal thing here. I helped a girl, I did not impregnate her. I helped her because this happened. I helped her. We went to Buffalo. She had to do this at 18 years old because she was not prepared to go forward. I don't know how her life would have turned out if she had to go forward in that situation.
Indeed.
And it turned out that she then became a medical professional who helps young women in that same condition. And
Scott, well, how does Scott respond to that?
Well, the way I would respond to it is that you're right. You don't know how it would have turned out, but you do know how it did turn out because an intervention happened. I would also say that once people are involved in either abortion or facilitating it or encouraging it or aiding and abetting it, what they are doing is they are taking a human life and they are complicit in the act of murder or not, if not involved in it. As a consequence, they are going to strongly resist that anything illicit or immoral has happened. And so consciences are seared on this matter. I would say as a society, we do not protect the most vulnerable, and those are the unborn. They can't stand up for themselves. And then once you've made a decision as a society that you don't extend the protections of life to those that are most vulnerable, then it's only a matter of time before we go to the elderly being a drain on the society or the handicap being too...
Come on, that hasn't happened.
That is happening as we speak in the euthanasia debate.
Nonsense.
That is happening as we speak worldwide, and you know it.
So you're
so
saying
Scott
that
has just called thousands of Canadian women and their loved ones and partners, including Jason, murderers.
And
so,
people
Jason,
like
how do you feel
and
to be called a
the
murderer?
aiders and abettors of it? That's precisely what I have said.
And so you think we're embracing a culture of death then?
It's a culture of death. That is precisely what it is. And it presents itself in terms of liberation, reproductive freedom. And yet at every turn, this liberation is actually an enslavement. It's led to deaths.
A culture of death is seeing hundreds of women die every year, which is what was happening before.
It's still
and
happening.
What continues to happen from botched backdoor abortions.
And now it's the killing of women on a massive scale in gendercide. These are young women whose lives are being terminated because of the choice, the pressure put on them by families, including men. And
well, that was the law that was being proposed by one of the conservative backbenchers. Stephen Harper didn't want to pick up on that and take that any further. I mean, so Scott's point...
Because he doesn't want to commit political suicide by doing what Scott has just done.
He doesn't want to do the right thing,
most of his constituents murderers. This is absurd.
Mohammed Milton, hello, you're on the Oakley Show.
Good morning, John. How are you?
Hey, great, Mohammed. Thank you.
Great day for talking to you, John. John, here is my beef here. They say freedom of women to choose. Morgentaler is a mass murderer, John. He is a mass murderer. He's a co-killer. Cheri DiNovo voted against the pit bull legislation, but she's okay with killing unborn babies. How about a woman's choice not to get pregnant? I understand in a rape situation, John,
there are two people involved in a pregnancy, I think.
No, Cheri, let me make my point and then take your mic and speak your mind out, please, okay? Respect me as I respect you. I respect your opinion. Why is not the woman's choice not to get pregnant instead of taking a screwdriver and killing an unborn baby? You may as well have it delivered and just shoot it in the head. Thank you, John.
Nobody's talking about what we were talking about is avoiding the kind of screwdriver scenario Mohammed just described. That's what used to happen and still happens where abortion is illegal. Women die constantly. And remember, we're talking about a lot of young girls, many of them underage, some victims of incest, victims of rape. These are all people who Scott would call murderers. Well, this is egregious. And Mohammed, quite frankly, it takes two to bring about a pregnancy.
All right, let me just interject.
And the same people who are against abortion actually are the ones who fight against family planning, period.
Well, not true.
What I'm looking at, though, the legacy of Morgentaler and being jailed first and then finally lionized with the Order of Canada, there's obviously, whether you want to call it an evolution or a devolution, either way, there's a change. And it's even reflected more recently in the CBS New York Times poll that came out earlier this week, or I guess it was back in February, my apologies, where Catholics who are self-identified, amongst the various issues that define our time, 74% think abortion ought to be available in certain circumstances. And I'm saying there seems to be some kind of a seismic shift in social mores or changes. And now when it comes to the Catholic Church, I don't know if you can you still be a Catholic if you don't subscribe to the doctrine, to the letter of the law? I mean, can you still be a Catholic in good standing? How important is doctrine to one's faith? Scott Masson?
It's essential. If you don't adhere to the doctrine, then you don't adhere to the word of God who inspired the doctrine. So long as the doctrine is in accordance with the Bible, then it's essential to it.
Well, all right, but Cheri, people say they'd rather follow their own conscience in these matters. You're a doctor of divinity. What do you say in this matter? I mean,
as I said before, there's nothing in the Bible that is anti-abortion, not one word. This is a cultural overlay, quite frankly, a very patriarchal one. And I know many, many Catholics who not only use birth control, but also...
are they still Catholics in that sense, then, the strictest sense?
They feel extremely faithful, and they are. And, of course, the vast majority of Christians feel that way, too, not just Catholics. So only 6% of Canadians in an Ipsos Reid poll taken a year ago feel the way Scott does. Only 6% think abortion should be considered murder. That's a very small percentage.
So we've moved from science and theology to people's feelings, and Cheri's going to talk about objective reality and talk about law and talk about what is good and just and right.
Science is not on Scott's side.
Science is entirely on my side, actually. Development begins at conception and it continues after birth. We develop teeth after we're born. Women develop breasts after we're born. I don't know who you're quoting here because there is no consensus as to when human life starts. There's human life in sperm and eggs. I'm quoting Dr. Maureen Kondak, Associate Professor of Neurobiology and Anatomy at the University of Utah School of Medicine.
There is, so one would be, and that's what led people like yourself to be against family planning, against using a pill.
What does that have to do with the topic?
Because there's life in sperm and ova, too. There's life in cells.
No, life begins. No.
right,
Human
but,
life begins when the two come together.
I wanted to get back to the issue, though, of these self-identified Catholics for a case in point when it comes to how people identify, still feel they're spiritual or religious people. But, like, for example, the poll from the New York Times CBS found 74% think abortion ought to be available. These are Catholics now. That's totally antithetical to the doctrine. 61% favor the death penalty, and 62% of American Catholics think same-sex marriages should be legal. So are they cafeteria Catholics? Have they disqualified themselves from being considered as such? And that's why I get back to my point. Doctrine, you say, is critical to... can we distinguish between faith and a religion? Or am I parsing terms here? Is it a semantic argument? You know what I'm saying? I mean, can you still be considered to be a practitioner of the faith if you go counter to what the authorities are telling?
Well, if your belief and what is true can part ways, no, you cannot be anymore. The faith would mean nothing if it weren't anchored in certain truths. It would be meaningless. You could talk about a faith and you could believe in anything.
Let's go to Gary in the Beach. What do you got, Gary?
Well, I don't think you need to be religious to believe in life. And when one caller said, it's 2013, I've been hearing that for years. It's the 90s. Listen, the women's movement has been the most damaging movement in our society. This movement celebrates Dr. Morgentaler, who didn't see a fetus as a life. Now we have a Philadelphia doctor killing kids after birth.
Right.
Is it too late to kill someone after they were born, Mr. Noble? If not, why not? Thank you.
Oh, that's patently absurd. And by the way, it would be nice to hear from a woman. We've had 3 men calling, and so I would encourage women, especially women who have been faced with an unwanted pregnancy, to call in, because these are the folk that we're of course dealing with on this show. But that clearly nobody supports killing children. Again, Dr. Morgentaler himself lived through the Holocaust. He was a Holocaust survivor. He spent 18 months in jail. He had a heart attack while in solitary confinement. He was attacked.
He was
had
abusive to every woman in his family.
Of death threats. These are the same people who want to support embryos' right to life, who tried to firebomb his clinic twice, tried to kill abortion doctors in the States. This is considered by the police to be an act of terrorism.
So what you're saying is somewhat disingenuous or hypocritical.
Absolutely. And I think the vast majority of Canadians and Americans get that.
Well,
they get that, this is not a black and white issue the way it's always presented.
But you're presenting it that way.
Absolutely not. It's a woman's right to choose.
And that's the black and white issue.
Nobody's forcing her to choose an abortion, but you would like to force her to be pregnant.
Actually,
that's the difference.
The reality here is that 64% of women feel compelled by people outside themselves to have an abortion.
I would love to see that poll. I totally.
All right. By the way, you wanted to hear
poll.
from women. Let's hear from some women. We'll come back. We'll take it another segment, and Victor will try to recruit some women here because Cheri believes that this might be a stacked deck. And to her point, we'll get to some women callers in a moment. Cheri, DiNovo, Dr. Scott Masson, and last call to the lines on whether or not Morgentaler, his legacy, made him heroic or diabolical, and 1 or 2 other items in parting as well. Momentarily on the Oakley Show. Talk Radio, AM 640. All right, back into it. Great day for Talk Radio. A few moments yet with Cheri DiNovo and Dr. Scott Masson, and on the issue of Morgentaler's legacy, how you perceive it. Cheri wanted to hear from some women, so let's go with a slew, including B. Good morning, B.
Good morning.
Yep.
As a young woman, I was very pro-abortion. I thought it was my right to make a decision. With my first pregnancy, it was not going well at all, and my doctor advised me to abort the fetus. Mm-hmm. She said, if it's born, in all likelihood, it will not be normal. Well, I fell apart. I did not want to make that decision. I thought, I would have no problem saying abort the fetus, but I did. Fortunately, I aborted naturally. So I still maintain that abortion should be available to the woman who wants it. No one should dictate. No one should tell us what we should do with our body. But once you go through it, that's when you're faced with it. And like I said, it was not something I could do, even though mentally I thought I could.
And so in, I guess, retrospect, through the prism of the years of Morgentaler fighting the fight and having his clinic shut down and him being busted, going to jail and protests and so on and so forth, and the legacy that's some people draw into great disrepute, was he an emancipator?
Yes. I admire him.
All right, I appreciate your call. Let's see what we get from Susan in Toronto. Go ahead, Susan. Oh, I lost Susan. Let me move down the line. Oh, where we go? Joanne, is it Joanne?
It's Joanne.
Hi, Joanne.
Well, I'm a woman, and I don't think what Henry Morgentaler did was tremendous. I think it was horrible. As a woman, I feel protective of a life growing inside me, and I don't see it as my body. I see it as somebody else inside me that I have to take care of. I feel protective. I don't feel it's my right to decide whether to kill it. And I don't even see it as a religious issue. I don't even know why that keeps coming into the equation. You don't have to be religious. You don't have to believe in God to think that murder is wrong. And if you see that life inside you as a valuable life, as a separate life, then you believe that killing it is not a good thing to do.
Cheri, how do you respond? You wanted women to call in. This is a woman being frank with you.
Absolutely. Well, we've had one woman on both sides of the issue now. And again, I would uphold it's a woman's right to choose, and it's her right to choose to carry that pregnancy through absolutely as well. What I object to is a forced pregnancy, to force a woman to be pregnant when she doesn't wish to be. And remember, we're talking often of cases where these were not wanted pregnancies in any way, shape, or form. We're talking also, I remember walking to the Morgentaler Clinic with a young 16-year-old who was the victim of rape, and passing people jeering at her and yelling at her to be able to go in. It was a horrendous experience. Had we forced her to have that child, do you really think that was the best for mother and child? Now, again, it was her choice, and every woman should have that right to choose not to be forced to be pregnant and to forced to have a child, to be forced to have a child. That's the question here.
Joanne?
Very seldom is the abortion issue about rape. I mean, I know lots of people who've had abortions, and none of them have been raped.
Right.
It's just been inconvenient, and they haven't used birth control when they should have used birth control. That's really not the crux of the abortion debate.
As a United Church minister, I counsel women who are considering it, and I have never met a woman who's taken that decision lightly. It's a terrible decision to have to make for any woman.
Do you tell them they're going to take a life when they do this?
This
Cheri?
is not an easy. No, I would never tell them that.
Right,
Call
exactly.
them a murderer, because that is not Christian, and
it
that
is Christian,
not
actually,
loving,
to
and
warn
that is
people
not
of what is actually happening.
What should a minister do is to walk with them so that they make their decision with their doctor and with God.
All right, Joanne.
And not because a law tells them.
Final word, Joanne?
I just think it depends upon whether you see that as a separate and valuable life. If you see it as a separate and valuable life, it's murder, whether it's your right to choose it or not.
All right, I appreciate that. Let's move a few quick calls. Rob in Newmarket, go ahead. You're on the Oakley Show.
I just wanted to say, well, first of all, I think both of these people are just extreme. I think scenarios call for certain measures at any given time. But, I had a girlfriend that was pregnant at one point in time. She wanted to abort. I wanted the child. So, I guess her name is Cheri there. Where's my rights at that point? You were very convenient with that one caller when he called in and said, what about talking about women not becoming pregnant? You said, well, it takes two to tango. You're right. It does take two to tango. So where is the two in the decision?
First of all, I don't think there's anything extreme in what I'm saying. I'm upholding the law of the land. That is the law of the land. It is a woman's right to have an abortion. What Scott is talking about is contrary to our law and contrary to what most Canadians want.
Specifically to his question.
Yes, a woman has the right to choose. It is actually her body. We are forcing her to be pregnant. Think about the ramifications of that.
I did not
if
force my
she doesn't
girlfriend
want
to
to be pregnant, why would you want her to be?
We did it together.
Okay.
I did not force her to be pregnant.
No, you did not. But she is the one that's going to have to carry that child and give birth to that child.
Well, he believes he has rights. His DNA is also part of the equation.
Sure.
I would respectfully disagree with you. Respectfully disagree with you, and so would the vast majority of Canadians.
Right, appeal to the consensus of the majority, which is...
and to the law of the land.
Right, well, never forget that everything that Hitler did in Germany was legal, first of all, first point. Secondly...
Which is actually where Morgentaler gained his sense of social justice, was in the camps.
Yeah, it's
during
extraordinary.
the Holocaust, where he saw women
giving
birth to children who were immediately killed.
It's quite
and
interesting.
You think that was okay?
It's quite interesting to see that it's the strong that survived the Holocaust camps. How did Morgentaler end up surviving?
Whereas
the women and the children and the weak went in the ovens first.
That is a horrendous thing to say.
That is a horrendous thing to happen, no doubt.
To accuse...
For a man to have seen this and then to have
honestly,
done that is horror upon
all right,
horror.
well, we're going to leave it on that note. I guess
that's sad.
He's gone to his great reward, however you might perceive that. Henry Morgentaler, the legacy, we've sort of devoted most of the time to that particular discussion. So, as it is, he passed last week at 90, and we move on from there. I appreciate you coming in this morning and each hanging fire with their own perspective. Dr. Scott Masson, Associate Pastor at the Westminster Chapel in Toronto, and Dr. Cheri DiNovo, Ontario NDP member for Parkdale High Park. Thank you both.
Thank you for listening to this message brought to you by the Ezra Institute for Contemporary Christianity. Please feel free to share it with friends, but do not charge for or alter the material in any way without the express written consent of the EICC. Thank you.